By the time Naomi Adebayo realized someone had entered the sealed archive, the intruder was already inside. The one room no visitor was supposed to know existed. What unsettled her was not the break-in. It was the quiet assistant at the security door seconds later, already knowing which shelf the intruder had come for. Ren Ishida looked like a man hired to move books. He did not move like one. There was something off about him you couldn't explain with a cardigan and glasses. 3 days earlier, Naomi had been sitting across from Masato Kurobane in a glass conference room above the Foundation library, refusing to sign a destruction order. The document between them concerned 3 archival boxes from a private corporate collection acquired decades ago. According to the Foundation's internal report mold, had compromised the contents beyond reasonable conservation. Naomi had spent 11 years assessing damaged paper. "This was not mold. The discoloration pattern is wrong," she said. Masato did not look at the boxes. He looked at her contract. "You were hired to stabilize the collection. I was hired to assess it. The assessment is complete, not mine." His expression barely changed. He was 46, precisely dressed, and accustomed to meetings ending when he decided they had ended. The Foundation has already accepted the loss. Then, the Foundation accepted it before anyone examined the paper properly. That made him look up. Naomi slid one of the photographs toward him. The outer pages showed staining. Several pages deeper, the fibers were clean, except along the inner margin where sheets had been removed. These pages were taken out before the damage occurred. Masato studied the photograph for less than 2 seconds. "Can you prove that yes?" It was the answer he had not expected. Naomi watched him reconsider her. Not seriously enough. Her position at the Kurobane Cultural Foundation was temporary. 6 months externally contracted, no permanent staff authority, no board vote, no institutional history. She was 34 and British Nigerian. Newly arrived in Tokyo for the assignment, she still depended on employees twice her age to show which old storage rooms needed 3 separate keys. Masato had mistaken limited access for limited leverage. His concern was not personal dislike, it was containment. The Foundation was preparing for a donor review. Questions about deliberate interference with archived materials could delay insurance renewals, trigger outside audits, and force board disclosures nobody wanted. He needed the problem classified as deterioration. Naomi was supposed to make that classification respectable. Instead, she was becoming an obstacle. 2 weeks, Masato said. She waited. "You will complete the inventory already assigned to you. Nothing outside your scope. Then, we will review whether your contract remains useful." Useful to whom? To the institution paying you. He stood. That ended the meeting for him. For Naomi, it began the investigation. The Kurobane Library occupied an older building behind the Foundation's modern offices, 5 floors of private collections, restricted stacks. Restoration rooms and storage spaces designed before digitization made everyone suspicious of paper. Most employees treated Naomi with formal politeness. Ren Ishida mostly left her alone. He worked evenings, handled accession carts, returned reference volumes, replaced humidity strips, and seemed permanently dressed for an underheated reading room, dark trousers, plain cardigan, thin-framed reading glasses. Naomi noticed him because he never interrupted. She noticed that when senior staff entered the room, they made room for him the way people do, for someone important, not for a mere shelver. Not deference exactly. Awareness. The first time she asked where a 19th century shipping register had been moved, Ren answered without checking the database. Lower storage, east wall. 3rd cabinet, she found it there. You memorize shelf changes. Some. That one was moved 8 years ago. I've been here a while. He went back to repairing a label. His hands were wrong for delicate work. Not clumsy, scarred across 2 knuckles with an older line near the base of his thumb. Naomi assumed former manual labor. She did not ask. By the end of the first week, she had documented 11 altered bindings. The pattern looked accidental until she set the bindings side by side and compared them. Threads of slightly different age, sections removed and resewn. Thin marks inside the spine where someone had written symbols too small to see without magnification. One symbol repeated, a narrow vertical line crossed twice near the bottom. Naomi photographed it and logged the image privately. Ren saw her doing it. That wasn't in the old catalog, he said. She looked at him. You recognize it? He took half a second too long. No. You just told me where it wasn't. He adjusted his glasses. I've handled the catalog. That was all he offered. 2 nights later, Naomi stayed after closing to examine a ledger Masato's office had flagged for transfer. At 9:17 p.m., the access indicator above the restricted vault changed from green to amber. The building's security system did not alarm. That was the first problem. The second was that Naomi had not authorized anyone inside. She checked the access console. One door had opened using a maintenance credential. The vault contained manuscripts, corporate records, and several items awaiting conservation review, including one of the books with the strange stitching mark. Naomi did not call out. She stepped into the preservation control room and locked the inner corridor. The vault used localized atmospheric controls to protect fragile material. It also had compartment doors designed to isolate fire, humidity failure, or chemical contamination. Naomi triggered the isolation sequence for Section C. Heavy internal doors closed, not fast enough to trap someone permanently, long enough to remove their easiest route out. She called building security. Then someone moved behind the glass partition. A man in dark clothing emerged between 2 shelves, holding a wrapped volume under one arm. He saw the sealed corridor. Then he saw Naomi. He dropped the volume onto a cart instead of fighting the door and risking damage. That told her something. He had come for the object, not random theft. He moved toward the service passage. Naomi keyed the secondary seal. Nothing happened. Someone had disabled it. The intruder reached the passage. Ren appeared from the opposite end. No cardigan, no cart, no hesitation. He did not shout. He looked once at the man, once at the disabled seal, and stepped sideways before the intruder even changed direction. The exchange lasted seconds. The stranger abandoned the volume and escaped through the maintenance corridor before Foundation security reached the floor. Ren did not chase him far. That was what Naomi found stranger than anything else. He could have. She was certain of it. Instead, he returned to the vault and picked up the book with both hands. He checked the spine before checking himself. You knew what he wanted, Naomi said. Ren set the volume on the conservation table. No, you came directly here. I saw the access alert. There was no alarm. His eyes moved to the control panel. That was confirmation enough. You knew. He removed a small object from the floor near the cart, a torn paper slip. Before he could fold it, Naomi caught the mark printed in one corner. The same crossed line from the repaired bindings. She held out her hand. Ren looked at it, then at her. For the first time since she had met him, he hesitated. He seemed to be calculating whether he could still treat her like ordinary staff. He gave her the paper. Corporate security, Naomi asked. Formerly, you were very quick. So were you. That was not an answer. Security arrived. Ren became unremarkable again. He let others speak first. Let Naomi explain the isolation system. Let the guards inspect the failed service lock. But 2 of the security men addressed him before leaving. Not as Ishida-san. Just a short acknowledgement accompanied by a bow too formal for an assistant. Ren pretended not to notice Naomi watching him. After midnight, the building emptied. Naomi stayed. The stolen volume had been returned to her table under temporary evidence seal. She examined it without opening the pages fully. Near the lower spine, hidden beneath an old repair, she found another handwritten notation. Not the crossed line symbol. A shelf code. She entered it into the Foundation database. No result. She tried the legacy catalog. Nothing. Ren was standing behind the adjacent work table when she looked up. "Does C-17 black mean anything to you?" He did not answer. That interested her more than another lie would have. Naomi turned the book toward him. The reading glasses did nothing to hide his reaction. For less than a second, the quiet assistant she had known disappeared. Then Ren reached for the volume and stopped before touching it. "Where did you find that? In the spine?" "Who else saw it?" "No one." He looked toward the closed archive door. Naomi understood then that the man who had broken into the Foundation had not been trying to steal an expensive book. He had been trying to find whatever the book pointed to. And Ren Ishida, the harmless employee Masato's people, barely seemed to acknowledge on paper, knew exactly what that was. Naomi did not ask Ren what C-17 black meant again. She watched what he did instead. He took the book from the conservation table and wrapped it in acid-free cloth. He carried it to a locked cabinet that technically required 2 staff signatures. He used one key. The second lock opened without another. That was the first answer. Not who he was. Only that whatever access rules governed the library did not govern him in the same way. The next morning, Masato sent Naomi a revised work order, restricting her to the West Restoration Room. She read it once, folded it, and continued examining the damaged ledgers. At 10:43, the access restrictions disappeared from her terminal. No explanation. At 11, Ren passed her desk carrying a cart of returned volumes. "You did that." He did not stop. "Did what my permissions." Perhaps someone corrected an administrative mistake. Masato doesn't make administrative mistakes. Ren glanced at her monitor. No, he makes strategic ones. Then he kept walking. Naomi stared after him. That sentence told her more than his evasions from the night before. He knew Masato well enough to predict him, and he had enough influence to reverse a board-level restriction without leaving his name on the process. The danger was no longer that Ren might be involved. The danger was not knowing which side he was on. 2 days later, Naomi found out how far his influence reached. A pair of men arrived after closing. They did not enter through the public doors. They waited beside the service alley in dark coats, both too still to be couriers and too alert to be donors. Naomi saw them through the staff room window. Ren was already outside. She stayed behind the glass. The older of the 2 men said something she could not hear. Ren answered. The younger man interrupted. Ren looked at him. Nothing dramatic happened. No threat. No raised voices. The younger man immediately lowered his head. A few seconds later, both men bowed and left. Ren returned, carrying nothing. Naomi was waiting beside the stairwell. "You said corporate security." "I did. They didn't look like clients." "They weren't." "What are they?" He considered the question. "People who should not be here. That isn't an answer. It is the only one I can give you tonight." Naomi stepped aside to let him pass, then changed her mind. "Did you remove Masato's restriction?" "Yes." The admission stopped her. It was the first clean truth he had given her. "Why?" "Because he was using procedure to stop you examining material he wants classified as damaged." "You could have lied." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Ren looked toward the reading room where 2 junior employees were packing archival boxes. "Because if I lie about everything eventually, the truth becomes useless." It was not enough to trust him, but it was enough to change the question. Until then, Naomi had been trying to decide whether Ren was dangerous. Now she began asking whether danger was the reason he was useful. The hidden catalog gave her the next answer. She found it because the crossed line mark from the damaged bindings appeared again on a shelf tag that had been filed under an obsolete classification system. The official record described the shelf as holding family correspondence. The actual contents were shipping agreements, property transfers, port contracts, charitable grants, and handwritten memoranda, linking companies that should have had no obvious relationship. Naomi mapped the names. A logistics firm connected to a construction trust, the trust connected to a political donor, the donor connected to a security contractor. The contractor appeared again beside an entertainment company and 2 import businesses. Individually, nothing proved much. Together, the pattern read less like a library and more like a ledger. Ren found her with 6 files open across the table. You shouldn't leave those exposed. That sounds almost like advice. It is. From the librarian? His expression did not change. No. That single word settled between them. Naomi closed the nearest folder. What is this place? Ren pulled out the chair opposite her, but did not sit. A record of relationships. Between legitimate businesses, some, and the rest. You already know enough to answer that. She did. Not the details. Not the hierarchy. But enough. The Kurobane Cultural Foundation had not merely been supported by an old family with questionable connections. Its archive had preserved decades of overlap between legitimate commerce and organized crime. Naomi looked at him again. You work for them. Ren's hand rested on the chair back. Yes. Another truth, another answer that immediately created a worse question. What exactly do you do? That answer would change how you behave. Maybe I deserve to know what I'm standing inside. You deserve to know what affects your work. That's convenient. Yes. She almost laughed, but didn't. At least, he did not pretend otherwise. You expect me to continue, I expect you to decide for yourself. While you decide what I'm allowed to know. For now. There it was. The imbalance stated without decoration. Naomi hated it. She also respected that he had not tried to disguise it as protection. That evening, she tested him. A retired catalog manager named Fujimoto had agreed to meet. Naomi had found his initials beside several altered accession entries. The man arrived nervous, carrying an umbrella, though the rain had already stopped. Ren joined them uninvited. Fujimoto saw him and nearly turned around. Naomi noticed. So did Ren. Sit, Ren said. Fujimoto did. That was enough to confirm that Ren's authority extended far beyond shelving permissions. Naomi asked the questions. Fujimoto admitted that certain records had been moved years ago under direct instruction from senior Kurobane representatives. He refused to name who. Ren could have forced the issue. Naomi saw it clearly. A name a phone call won implied consequence Fujimoto would have talked. Instead, Ren said, You may leave. Fujimoto stared at him. You heard her questions, Ren continued. If you choose to answer later, contact her. Not me. The man left almost too quickly. Naomi waited until the outer door closed. You let him go. He was afraid. That usually makes people easier to pressure? Yes, you could have. Yes. Why didn't you Ren finally sat? Because then you wouldn't know whether his answer was true or merely useful. That mattered, not because it made him good. Naomi was too old to confuse restraint with innocence. It mattered because he had given up a quicker route to information in order to protect the integrity she needed. For the first time, she believed one thing about him without qualification. Whatever Ren wanted from the archive, he wanted the record to survive his influence. The belief lasted until the photograph. She found it the following afternoon inside a Foundation history volume scheduled for digitization. The image was 20 years old. 3 men stood beside a ceremonial display during an acquisition event. The youngest was unmistakable. No glasses, no cardigan, hair shorter, a dark suit. Ren. The caption beneath the photograph read, Renji Kurobane Family Executive Representative. Naomi read it twice, then again. She took the volume downstairs. Ren was repairing a torn dust jacket under a work lamp. She placed the book in front of him. He looked at the photograph, then at her. Ishida, she said. No. How much of that name is real? None. She pulled out the chair opposite him. Renji Kurobane. Yes, the missing Kurobane. He did not answer immediately. He did not need to. Naomi had heard the name in donor gossip and half-finished conversations among staff. Renji Kurobane, the man who had effectively disappeared from public view after an internal rupture months earlier. the name people avoided saying too loudly. Naomi stood. You stood beside me for weeks and let me believe you were support staff. Yes, you altered my access. Yes, you know Masato. Yes, you brought me into files connected to your own organization. Yes. Each answer made the deception worse because he was no longer hiding behind technicalities. She pushed the book toward him. Why should I believe anything now? You shouldn't. That stopped her more effectively than denial. Ren removed a key from inside his jacket and set it on the table. Small, black, unmarked. There is a sealed storage room beneath the east stacks. Naomi looked at the key. What's inside Material Masato does not know you have access to. That isn't what I asked. No. Is this another controlled reveal? Yes. The answer was almost offensive in its clarity. Ren stood. If you walk away, I will not stop you. If you stay, you should see what I have been protecting before you decide what I am. Naomi looked at the key for several seconds, then picked it up. The room beneath the east stacks held no weapons. No cash, no trophies of criminal power. It held paper, dozens of boxes, fragments, duplicate pages, bindings repaired with the same crossed stitching mark. Naomi moved slowly along the shelves. Several items had been restored by hand. Not recently. Some labels were dated 7 years earlier. 9, 12. She opened one ledger under the examination light. The restoration notes in the margin were neat, compact, and familiar. She had seen the handwriting every day on accession slips left at Ren's station. Naomi turned the page. Same hand, different year. She looked over at him. You did this. Ren said nothing. 12 years ago. Yes. The implication landed harder than his name had. He had not begun hiding inside the library after the recent internal conflict. He had been working on these altered records for more than a decade. Naomi closed the ledger carefully. Masato didn't start this. Ren watched her from the doorway. No, for the first time since the breach, Naomi realized it. The conspiracy in the archive predated the man trying to bury it, and the person she had just begun to trust, cautiously and against her better judgment, had been standing inside that history from the beginning. Naomi stopped treating the sealed room beneath the east stacks as Ren's secret. She started treating it as evidence. That distinction mattered. For the next 4 days, she photographed fibers and compared ink aging. She reconstructed removed folios and separated the altered records into chronological groups. Ren gave her access to materials the board had never authorized her to see, but he stopped trying to decide what she examined first. That was new. So was the fact that Naomi no longer asked him to leave the room. They worked across from each other under the same conservation lamps. They spoke only when the work required it. Attraction existed in the spaces between those exchanges, but Naomi distrusted anything that made bad judgment feel reasonable. Trust was more difficult. Ren earned a small part of it when she asked for the original chain of custody records. He handed them over without editing the pages first. He lost some of it again when she discovered 3 accession boxes had already been moved under his authority before she arrived. You relocated them, she said. Yes. Without documenting where. Yes, that is exactly the behavior I am investigating. I know. She set the inventory sheet down. Then explain it. Ren remained on the other side of the work table. The boxes were scheduled for disposal, so you hid them. I prevented them from being destroyed. By becoming another person who decides which rules matter. He did not answer immediately. Naomi continued. That is the problem, Ren. You keep calling it protection when what you mean is control. This time he did answer. Sometimes control is what prevents irreversible damage, and sometimes it causes it. His gaze moved toward the repaired ledgers between them. I learned that late. Naomi waited. He rarely volunteered anything about himself. When he did, it was because the information had become necessary. My father believed authority was justified if the result protected the family, he said. Business, reputation, employees, allies. It became very easy for every decision to qualify. That sounds familiar? Yes. The admission came without defense. Ren pulled one of the old catalog cards from the tray. When I took over, I told myself I would be different because I would use the same power more carefully. And were you... for a while? Naomi watched him place the card back exactly where it had been. What changed? I started noticing that people stopped telling me when I was wrong. That was the closest he had come to explaining why a man with his authority had disappeared into a library. Not guilt, not fear, distrust of what power had made possible around him. Naomi understood the logic. She did not let him turn it into absolution. And now you decide alone what truth I can see. Yes. So you haven't solved the problem. No. The honesty irritated her more than denial would have, because it left nothing easy to attack. You could stop. I am trying. Trying is not the same as stopping. No. Their relationship changed there. Not into affection, into something more dangerous. Naomi realized Ren was willing to let her challenge the very behavior that had kept him alive and powerful. Ren realized she would not accept protection as a substitute for consent. Neither stepped away. That was the vulnerability Masato noticed, not romance. Access. Masato requested a formal audit of Naomi's project privileges the next morning. The language was administrative. The intent was not. He argued that an external conservator had been granted unauthorized access to family-sensitive materials. Whoever had granted that access was someone whose current executive status was under internal review. Naomi read the notice twice. Current executive status. Rin stood beside the window in the staff office. He is changing the argument, from the archive to you. Yes. Masato no longer needed to prove Naomi wrong. He only needed to prove that Ren had compromised institutional governance by giving her access. Ren took out his phone. Naomi recognized the decision before he made the call. No. He looked at her. If you override this, he uses it against you. If I do nothing, your access closes tonight. Then, we fight the access order properly. We do not have time. Ren gave her a measured look. Naomi noticed the word too late. He made the call. It lasted less than a minute. By afternoon, the audit restriction disappeared. Naomi's credentials remained active. The sealed room stayed open. Immediate problem solved. New problem created. At 6:17, Masato arrived in person. He did not go to Naomi. He went directly to Ren. They spoke behind a glass partition at the far end of the reading room. Naomi could not hear every word. She heard enough. You overrode the board. I corrected an interference. You used internal authority to protect an outsider's access to restricted family material, to preserve an active review. Masato gave a small, humorless smile. That distinction will be useful at council. Ren did not respond. Masato turned toward Naomi before leaving. Not with anger, recognition. For the first time, he no longer viewed her as a temporary inconvenience. He viewed her as evidence against Ren. The consequences arrived the next day. A professional contact in London forwarded Naomi an inquiry from a museum director asking whether she had exceeded the terms of her Japanese contract. Then, another message came from a conservation journal. Someone was circulating the claim that Naomi had become personally involved with a senior member of a criminal organization and was using privileged access to manufacture conclusions about the collection. Nothing had been published. Yet. Masato did not need publication. He needed contamination. If Naomi's professional independence became questionable before she completed authentication, every finding could be dismissed as compromised. Ren read the message over her shoulder. I can stop this. Naomi turned around. How? He did not answer. That was enough. No. They are attacking your credibility, and your solution is what call the right editor, frighten the right board member, make somebody withdraw the rumor because they know who asked yes. She stared at him. Then Masato wins. Ren's expression hardened. He is already damaging you. He is trying to make my work look dependent on you. If you use your influence to protect my reputation, you prove his argument." Ren looked away toward the archive. Naomi lowered her voice. "This is where protection becomes control." He remained still for several seconds. Then, he put the phone back into his pocket. That choice cost him. By refusing to intervene, he left the attacks on Naomi unanswered. By allowing them to continue, he also demonstrated that he was willing to let her preserve her independence, even when it hurt them both. That night, they stopped working as employer and expert. They became partners under terms neither fully liked. Naomi would control the preservation methodology and external authentication. Ren would provide access and internal records, but could not interfere with her conclusions. If either crossed those boundaries, the arrangement ended. They shook hands on it. The contact lasted only a second. It felt more consequential than anything either of them had allowed before. Then Naomi returned to the oldest alteration group. The paper told a different story from the recent changes. The newer removals redirected responsibility. The older ones concealed relationships entirely. Different intent, different hand, same archive. She compared dates. 12 years, 15, 17. Several changes predated Masato's influence over the Foundation. Naomi pulled one ledger closer. The authorization code belonged to the office of the former chairman, Seiji Kurobane, Ren's father. She looked at Ren. He was not reading the page. He was watching her. And he was not surprised. Naomi understood before she asked. "You knew." Ren said nothing. "You knew the oldest alterations happened under your father." "Yes." The answer struck harder than the accusation. "How long?" "A long time. You let me spend days reconstructing something you already knew. I needed you to prove it independently." "That is not the same as telling me the truth." "No." Before Naomi could continue, Ren's phone vibrated. He read the message once, then placed it face down. "What Masato has called the Council. For what to review, whether I still have authority over the Foundation." Naomi looked at the open ledger. Then she looked at the access card Ren had used to keep her inside the archive. The thing he had protected was now the reason they could remove him. And if they removed him, Masato would not need to steal another book. He could take control of the entire library legally. The council meeting began at 9 in the morning. By 9:15, Naomi understood. Masato had already changed the nature of the fight. He was no longer arguing about missing pages. He was arguing about legitimacy. The senior members of the Kurobane structure sat around a long table in one of the Foundation's private conference rooms. Some represented legal companies. Some represented older obligations no annual report would ever describe honestly. All of them understood what Masato was offering. Stability. A simple explanation. Renji Kurobane had withdrawn from active leadership and hidden himself inside a Foundation property. He had overridden governance procedures and granted an external specialist access to records capable of damaging the organization. Masato did not need to call Ren unstable. He only needed to make him look compromised. "An Oyabun cannot place personal judgment above institutional survival," Masato said. Naomi sat 2 seats behind Ren. She was present only because her status as external conservator made excluding her inconvenient now that the archive itself was under formal review. Masato turned toward her once. Not often. He had learned from Chapter 1's mistake. He no longer dismissed her. He was trying to define her. Outsider, liability, evidence of Ren's failure. Ren listened without interrupting. When Masato finished, one of the older council members asked, "Did you authorize her access to sealed family records?" "Yes," Ren said. "Did the board approve it?" "No." "Did you override a restriction placed on her credentials?" "Yes." Masato barely needed to move after that. Ren had provided the facts himself. Naomi understood the trap. Every action Ren had taken to preserve her work could be presented as proof that the work was contaminated by his influence. She also understood something worse. If Ren defended himself through raw authority, now Masato would win, even if he lost the vote. Naomi opened her notebook. She had stopped taking notes on what people said. She was listing what could still be proven without any of them. The answer was in the bindings, not the names, not the syndicate relationships, the physical record, paper, thread, ink, fiber, repair chronology. Things that did not care who controlled the room. Masato continued. If the Council transfers custodial authority today, the Foundation can isolate the compromised collection and relocate it. It can then begin a neutral review. Neutral, Naomi asked. Several heads turned. Masato looked at her. This is an internal proceeding. You just described moving materials under active conservation review. The board owns them. Ownership does not change what relocation does to evidentiary continuity. Masato's expression remained polite. And who determines evidentiary continuity? Ms. Adebayo, I do. Under the contract, your office approved. That was the first time uncertainty entered his face. Small. Real. Naomi continued before anyone could interrupt. The external conservator clause permits independent preservation review. Only when there is demonstrable evidence of systematic alteration. Masato said, You have allegations. I have microscopy. The room changed, not emotionally, procedurally. Naomi opened a folder. Different thread ages in the same binding. Removed folios with surviving fiber signatures. Inks applied years apart. Catalog references that predate the current shelf system. Repair layers that do not match Foundation restoration logs. She looked at Masato. You approved a contract assuming I would never have reason to use that clause. He said nothing. The first injustice had finally returned with consequences. Naomi had been temporary. That was precisely why she mattered. Her authority came from outside the Kurobane hierarchy. Ren turned slightly toward her. He had not known she was going to say it here. That mattered too. She was not acting on his orders. She was acting beyond them. The council adjourned for 30 minutes. Masato left with 2 board members. Ren waited until the room emptied. You have enough. Not yet. For external review. For tampering, yes. For sequence, almost. Ren understood immediately. Sequence changes intent. Yes. The oldest alterations and the newest ones were different. Naomi had already suspected it. Now she needed to prove who had repaired what and when. She returned to the archive. Ren followed. In the sealed room beneath the east stacks, Naomi laid out 6 ledgers from different years. The crossed stitching mark appeared inside all of them. Same narrow vertical line, 2 short bars. For 3 chapters, she had assumed the symbol belonged to whoever was selecting records for removal. Now, under magnification, she saw something that had been easy to miss. The mark was beneath the later stitching in 2 volumes, not above it. It had been placed there before the most recent alterations. Naomi stopped. Ren. He came closer. She pointed. This mark isn't a deletion code. He said nothing. She examined another binding, then another. Same pattern. Different years, same hidden notation. Her attention moved to the handwritten restoration notes from the sealed room. Ren's handwriting, compact, exact. She looked up. You marked the repaired records? Yes. That answer changed how the archive read. Naomi stared at the ledgers again. He had not been identifying what needed to disappear. He had been identifying what he had secretly restored. You knew which books would be targeted because they were yours. Yes. The man in the vault wasn't following your system. He was following it after someone else learned what it meant. Masato. Not as originator, as inheritor. Naomi pulled the oldest ledger closer. Then, who started the first alterations? Ren looked at the authorization code. He did not make her ask twice. My father, Seiji Kurobane, the respected former head whose name still sat above 3 Foundation galleries. Ren explained only what was necessary. Years earlier, Seiji had ordered records altered to conceal political and financial relationships. Those edits could have damaged not only the Kurobane organization, but legitimate companies, pension funds, contractors, and people with no knowledge of what supported them. Ren discovered the changes while preparing a succession review. He confronted his father. That confrontation had not ended well. Naomi looked at the glasses on his face. She had seen the small scar beside his temple before and treated it as irrelevant. Ren removed the glasses. The scar disappeared partly beneath the frame when he wore them. My father struck me with a metal paperweight the first time I accused him of changing the archive. Naomi did not respond. The detail did not make Seiji monstrous enough to simplify anything. It made Ren's disguise mean something different. The glasses had not only hidden his face, they had hidden the visible residue of the first time he learned that family legacy and truth were not the same thing. You could have exposed him. Yes, but you didn't. No. Why? Because at the time, I believed exposure would collapse businesses that had nothing to do with his decision, and you chose for everyone. Yes. There it was again. Protection becoming control. Ren had preserved the original fragments, but he had still appointed himself the person entitled to decide when truth could survive being known. Naomi felt anger before sympathy. Then Ren gave her the final piece. Masato found the duplicate records 3 years ago. Naomi looked at him. He didn't begin the lie, Ren said. He learned how useful it was. The later alterations made sense immediately. Seiji's edits had erased relationships. Masato's edits redirected responsibility. Toward Ren. A false archive built first to protect the father had been converted into a weapon against the son. 2 separate crimes. 1 record. Naomi sat back. Then another memory surfaced. Her own hiring, the specialist article, her published method for identifying reconstructed archival sequences without destructive testing. She looked at Ren. No, he did not pretend not to understand. You knew my work. Yes. Before Tokyo. Yes. You arranged the contract. I influenced the shortlist. Naomi stood. The betrayal was quieter than discovering his identity. Worse because it touched something personal. The roadside incident. Months earlier, before she knew him as Ren Ishida, she had found an injured stranger near a service lane behind the Foundation District and called emergency help before disappearing into her own workday. Later, she thought his odd loyalty might have started there. Ren answered before she asked. I had already chosen you for the archive. Naomi stared at him. For 1 second, everything between them became suspect again. The cooperation, the access, the restraint. Even the closeness that had grown because she believed they had stumbled into each other's lives by accident. You engineered the beginning, the professional one. You don't get to separate them now. I know. That was the right answer. She hated him for giving it. The council reconvened in 40 minutes. Naomi turned away. We saved the archive first. Ren did not ask for forgiveness. Then I decide what your deception costs you. That was the relationship turn, not reconciliation, not confession. A choice to continue beside him without surrendering judgment. They went back upstairs. Naomi triggered the independent preservation review. Her documentation package left the Foundation simultaneously for 3 external conservation institutions. Microscopy, fiber comparisons, stitch chronology, catalog discrepancies, time-stamped evidence. Nothing sensational, nothing dependent on Ren's testimony. Masato could still move the collection. But now, movement would become evidence. Ren used a different weapon. At the council table, he did not threaten anyone. He placed the succession records in front of them. He told them that validating Masato's claim, using an archive already proven to be manipulated, would invalidate their own historic authority. Self-preservation did what loyalty could not. The council refused Masato custodial control. Not unanimously. Enough. His strategy collapsed. He could not destroy the archive quietly. He could not use the altered record against Ren without also exposing those changes. He could not defend Seiji's legacy without admitting it had been preserved through falsification. By evening, the central threat was finished. But victory looked nothing like restoration. Ren's authority survived the vote. Everyone now understood how compromised the structure beneath it had become. Naomi's professional independence survived because she had acted independently of him, and whatever had existed between them before the final reveal could not simply resume. They stood alone in the reading room after the others left. Naomi closed the last ledger. What happens now? Ren looked toward the sealed stacks. The organization expects me to rebuild control. And will you? He took off his glasses. He set them beside the book. No. Naomi waited. Ren looked at the archive he had spent 12 years trying to preserve. He had never surrendered ownership of the truth. Then he said, "I'll give it up before I convince myself I still need it." Ren's resignation reached the Kurobane Council before noon the next day. He did not negotiate for a ceremonial title. He did not ask to remain as an advisor. He did not keep a private veto over the Foundation. By evening, the structure that had protected him for years was already adjusting to life without him at its center. Some men accepted the decision because they had no better option. Others saw it as weakness. A few left with Masato's faction, though Masato himself no longer had enough support to control the Foundation or revive the succession claim he had built through the altered archive. He was not destroyed. That would have been too simple. He lost something more specific. Credibility. Once the external review confirmed systematic tampering across multiple periods, Masato could no longer present himself as the guardian of institutional stability. Every argument he made about preserving continuity now carried the stain of evidence he had tried to exploit. He remained part of the wider Kurobane business network, but he no longer controlled the story. For a man who had built his position through narrative, that loss was permanent. The Foundation changed next. Its cultural arm was legally separated from the syndicate-controlled holdings. The archive entered independent custodial review. Some records were transferred to civil investigators. Others remained sealed because exposure would have harmed uninvolved employees and companies, but no one person could destroy them again. The Kurobane name stayed above the entrance for exactly 13 days. Then it came down. Naomi stood across the street while workers removed the lettering. Ren stood beside her. No guards, no car waiting at the curb, no one checking the sidewalk before he stepped outside. He had lost more than a title. Several senior associates had stopped answering his calls. 2 legitimate companies that once moved instantly when he gave instructions now required written requests and board approval. People who had spent years anticipating his preferences had begun asking whether he still had authority to decide anything. Naomi watched him adapt badly at first. He reached for his phone twice during the first week to solve problems he no longer had the right to solve. Both times, he stopped before calling. That restraint mattered more to her than the resignation announcement. Power was easy to surrender in a room full of witnesses. Habit was harder. Naomi's consequences came differently. A major museum in London quietly withdrew an invitation for a consulting project. Another institution delayed a fellowship review. Her name began circulating beside phrases like criminal entanglement and compromised access. The preservation community was divided. Some respected what she had done. Others considered proximity to the Kurobane archive too dangerous to touch. One journalist asked whether she had been protected by Ren during the investigation. Naomi ended the interview. She had spent too long proving her work was independent to let the story collapse into a powerful man shielding a woman from consequences. 3 months later, the old library reopened under a different legal structure. The Adebayo Preservation Trust occupied the eastern wing. Naomi hated the name when she first saw the registration papers, not because it was hers, because Ren had transferred the building before resigning and had not told her. She confronted him in the empty reading room. "You did it again." Ren stood beside the long central table. "I know. You made a decision involving my life without asking me. The trust is independent. That is not the point." "No." He had learned not to defend himself by citing intent. Naomi held the documents between two fingers. No reclaim clause? No. No family veto? No. No silent board seat? No. And if I tell you to leave, I leave. That answer changed the conversation. Not because it fixed the violation. It did not. Because for the first time, Ren had built a form of protection that included his own removal. Naomi looked around the room. The shelves were half empty. The old restricted cabinet stood open for reclassification. The private access corridor where Ren once disappeared without explanation was now sealed behind a glass partition with two-person entry rules. She kept the trust, not as a gift, as an institution with terms she rewrote herself. Ren signed every amendment, including the one that prohibited any donor, founder, or former executive from exercising unilateral control over collection access, especially him. After that, they did not become a couple, not immediately. Ren stayed away, unless invited. Naomi worked. The Institute hired staff. The first external research requests came in. The repaired ledgers moved into climate-controlled storage. One of the oldest volumes, the one marked with Ren's crossed stitching code, was selected for a public exhibition about altered records and provenance. Naomi wrote the label herself. No mention of family honor, no mention of criminal legend. Only what could be documented. Restored from altered archival material. Original intervention date, uncertain. Later reconstruction independently verified. Ren saw it on opening day. You removed my name. It wasn't relevant. A faint smile appeared. That may be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. It wasn't nice. I know. By then, the reading glasses were gone. He still carried them sometimes out of habit, folded in the inner pocket of his coat. Naomi noticed but never mentioned it. The scar near his temple remained visible. He stopped hiding that too. One evening, months after the reopening, Ren returned to the library 10 minutes before closing. Naomi was checking a humidity report. He placed a sheet of paper on her desk. A job application. She looked at it. Collections assistant, I have experience. You have terrible boundaries. I'm improving. Debatable. He waited. That was new too. He did not assume the answer. Naomi read the form. Under previous occupation, he had written only Executive Administration. She laughed once despite herself. Then she placed a staff handbook beside the application. You read this first. All of it. All of it. And then I decide whether I hire you. Ren picked up the handbook. No negotiation, no smile designed to charm the decision out of her. Just acceptance. That was when Naomi finally understood that the choice between them no longer depended on gratitude, fear, secrecy, or power. He was free to leave. She was free to refuse him. And he stayed in the room without trying to control what happened next. Weeks later, Ren worked at a side table beneath the same lights. Naomi had first caught him watching the altered bindings there. A junior conservator corrected him on storage procedure. He accepted it silently. Naomi looked up from across the room. For years, Ren had believed protection meant standing between danger and the people he cared about. Now, he was learning something harder. Sometimes protection meant trusting the people he loved to stand alone. Their love survived because neither of them could choose for the other anymore. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.